Project Zomboid, at its core, is a game designed to kill off your character. So, to help you delay the inevitable, here's a list of every way you can die in Project Zomboid. And stick around to the end, where I'll go over some common scenarios which should kill your character, but actually won't. Starting with a fan favorite, burning alive. Now, this is probably not the first thing you think when you think zombie apocalypse related deaths, but you'd be surprised by how often it happens. All you need to do is make one mistake. One day, you might just forget to turn off the oven before going to sleep, or accidentally microwave something with metal, and bam, you wake up, your base is burning to the ground, and your character along with it. If you're feeling brave, you might even try using fire to clear a horde. Molotovs are very effective against the undead, but they take a really long time to burn and will spread the fire through the whole town in the process, potentially roasting you. This is one of the most common character deaths, so if this hasn't happened to you yet, it will. It's just a matter of time. 2. Dying of thirst. Now, water is one of the easiest things to find on the map. It's in every sink, toilet, bathtub, river, and puddle. Even when the fresh supply does eventually get shut off, you will have 5 entire cities worth of stored, clean, drinkable water in every building. If you somehow run out of that, you can build a water collector, or even just put a bucket outside and wait for it to rain. It's so abundant, most people will run the high thirst perk and consider it free points. So, how's anybody dying from dehydration? No idea, but I'm sure that it happens. Next, we have falling to your death. Now, this might seem obvious, but falling from the roof of a tall building will instantly kill your character, and sometimes you won't even realize until it's too late. You could accidentally vault the wrong ledge or come across a fake floor and just fall straight through. There are quite a few tall buildings on the map, and more coming with Build 42, where you really need to be careful. Fall damage in Zomboid is no joke. Even one floor can be enough to cause some serious damage. This mechanic seems to be somewhat tied to your character's weight and how much they're carrying, but there's so much RNG involved, it's difficult to say what is actually a safe height. Personally, I would avoid jumping from anything above one floor unless I had a completely empty inventory. Zombies, on the other hand, are able to fall off rooftops without a scratch, so you can't use it as a horde clearing mechanic. Next, we have bad driving. Now granted, driving in isometric perspective with reverse controls while you're only able to see like 2 meters in front of you is not the easiest thing you could be doing, but that's even more of a reason not to speed. Driving fast in Project Zomboid is always a bad idea because the roads are full of sharp turns and littered with broken down vehicles. If you hit anything at speed, your character will suffer a fatal crash and even go flying through the windshield. Car crashes are also a very common way to lose your character. Even though you know about it, you'll still do it because nobody wants to drive slow in a game, and it takes a lot of self-discipline to force yourself to do it. Some people even deliberately take Sunday Driver, the worst perk in the game, just to avoid the temptation. Also, this goes without saying, but don't drink and drive. It actually delays your driving controls in the game, making a crash even more likely. Now we have starving to death. Now, this one will only be a problem for veteran players who like to play through the life of a single character over a long period of time. Even then, it's easy enough to overcome after a couple of playthroughs. At the start of the game, there is food everywhere, and starving is close to impossible when you have supplies in every home. But if you manage to survive for months on one character, you'll eventually find that most fresh food will become rotten, and you'll need to rely on long shelf life supplies or find renewable sources of food through fishing, trapping, or farming. Which leads to another food-related death, trying to save spoiled or rotten food. I know it sucks to throw away food, but food poisoning is no joke in the zombie apocalypse, and Project Zomboid takes it very seriously. One bite of a rotten carrot or a sip of spoiled soup, and you may as well grab a shovel and start digging your own grave. You can actually use a little spoiled food in recipes and get away with it if you're high enough level in cooking, but I would advise staying away from it unless you know what you're doing. You can also try your luck with the Iron Gut perk, which is supposed to reduce the sickness value of food, but that also involves a lot of guesswork, and I wouldn't mess with it if you value your character's life. Speaking of bad food, eating burnt food is another good way to lose your character. This is one of the least realistic mechanics in the game because it treats eating burnt food like it's radioactive. Just one bite of a burnt steak is all it takes, and there's very little you can do about it. Makes absolutely no sense, but you've been warned. Never overcook your food, and if you do throw it out, there is no saving it. Another way a lot of new players die is through accidental drug overdose. When your character is exhausted, depressed, and in pain, it's tempting to start taking every medication you find, but some combinations can be deadly. Specifically, remember that you can't mix sleeping pills and alcohol. If you do, your character will go into a forever sleep without warning. You don't usually expect for a game to program in something like this, so most people have done this at least once. A bonus tip for pharmaceuticals is to avoid overusing antidepressants. They take a while to work, so it's tempting to keep taking them until you see results. You won't kill your character, but you will waste a ton of pills before you realize it. Another thing that sounds like a good time but actually isn't is death from poison mushrooms and berries. Foraging is a great way to find food and resources, but if you accidentally eat the wrong thing, no amount of prayer will save you from the game over screen. Eating the wrong berry or mushroom you gather in the forest is a nasty way to go, and unless you're willing to spend valuable points on Herbalist or spend time searching the map for the magazine, you're not going to know what's safe and what isn't. If you're out in the forest and desperate for food, bugs and worms are a much better alternative. They'll make you unhappy, but at least they won't make you sick. Another good tip for wilderness survival is to boil your water, because drinking tainted water is an easy way to go. And the game actually warns you about this, so I don't imagine that this happens very often. It's true, you technically can get away with drinking one sip directly from the river, depending on your perks, but clean water is so easy to find, there's really no reason to risk it. If you have a source of tainted water, all you need to do is collect it and boil it to make it drinkable, which doesn't take much time at all and will keep your character healthy. You can even set your own filtration system by plumbing a sink directly to a rainwater barrel. There's really no reason to make your character sick. Speaking of poisonous drinks, drinking bleach is a surefire way to make sure your character doesn't live through the night. This is one of the cruelest ways to get rid of a character in-game, and one of the only real stealth weapons. You can actually sneak bleach into food and give it to an unsuspecting victim, and by the time they realize what you've done, it's already too late. Mostly people use it once they're already turning into a zombie to make sure that their loot doesn't walk away, but there have been some instances of people drinking it by accident because they mixed it up with their water bottle. Unfortunately, just one sip is enough, so maybe don't keep it in your main inventory. Now, let's move on to the zombie portion of the zombie apocalypse deaths. And unsurprisingly, there are a few. Starting with the most basic, the drag down death. When you're playing on default settings, if you find yourself surrounded by a few zombies at the same time, the game might just decide that you're overpowered and the zombies will drag you down to the ground, instantly killing your character. Now this happens a lot to both new and veteran players. It can be a huge surprise the first time it happens and feels a little unfair since you're not given much of a chance to fight back, but that's how the game plays on standard apocalypse settings. You can turn off this mechanic in sandbox mode or by choosing survivor difficulty in the main menu. In which case, in the same situation, you can still die from bleeding out. Every time a zombie bites or scratches your character, they create a wound which will need to be bandaged before you bleed out. Some wounds are more dangerous than others, and anything on the neck or head is a quick death sentence. Even with the drag down turned off, your character can easily be surrounded and trapped by zombies, where they will bleed out instead. Outside of combat, changing a dirty bandage at low health is also a huge risk, and deep lacerations will need to be stitched in order to heal. Even a tree branch can mess up your character by causing them to bleed and eventually die. This is a super common death type, it happens to everybody from time to time, so it will happen to you eventually. Another huge risk of fighting zombies is the chance that you'll catch the Nox infection, causing death by zombification. Unfortunately for you and your character, the Nox infection is completely incurable and 100% deadly. This right here is the reason that Zomboid is considered a very hard game. Any wound you receive from a zombie, be it a scratch, laceration, or bite, has a chance to infect you, just at different rates. Under default settings, a scratch is the most benign with a 7% chance to turn you into a zombie. A laceration is a 1 in 4 gamble with 25% chance, and a bite is always 100% deadly. Having said that, a lot of it is RNG, so you could technically survive 50 lacerations or get infected from 1 scratch. There really is no guarantee either way. In fact, zombies are so deadly, they can kill you from beyond the grave with corpse sickness death. If you spend too much time around the dead undead, your character will begin to show signs of nausea and sickness. It will start very mild at first, but over time, they'll develop more symptoms and start to slowly drop health. If you stay a little too long, it will eventually end in a game over screen. The good news here is that it's very easy to avoid, you just need to move away from the area. The only time this really becomes a problem is if there's a horde keeping you trapped inside the building, or if you let your character go to sleep and then they slip away before they ever wake up. Also keep in mind, this won't happen from one zombie in the area, but if you see flies buzzing around, stay away. And last on the list, we have PvP, where another greedy survivor decides they want your fancy katana all for themselves. The PvP death can take many forms, from gunshots to pipe bomb attacks and even stealth bleach poisonings. It's not something you'll ever have to worry about if you only play single player, but multiplayer survivors, watch out. At least until they introduce NPCs. God, I hope they introduce NPCs soon. Anyway, now let's move on to things that should kill you, but actually don't. First up, carbon monoxide poisoning, aka generator indoors. Now, this has been a rumor in the Zomboid community for years, but it's actually not true. Placing a generator indoors is a terrible idea, and it will absolutely mess up your character, but it won't kill them. At least not on its own. It will make them permanently exhausted and drop their health all the way down to 1%, but it will stop there. And as long as you don't take any damage from anything else, you'll be perfectly fine forever. I can see this being a useful thing to know for some very unique situations. 2. Wound infection. Not to be confused with the zombie Nox infection, which actually is deadly. Wound infection is what you see when you keep a dirty bandage on a scratch or a laceration for too long. As scary as it looks, it doesn't actually seem to do much aside from slowing down the wound healing. From my testing, even if you start with deep infected wounds on every single part of your body, they will eventually turn into scratches, and when you take the stitches out, just heal on their own. You don't actually need to do anything at all. Now, some people online say there is a small chance it can mysteriously turn into the zombie infection somehow, but that might just be a conspiracy, since most people say they've never had that happen in the thousands of hours of playtime. If you really want to get rid of the infection fast, just boil some ripped sheets to make sterilized bandages, and that's all you should ever need. Cold and hypothermia. Another thing that feels like it should eventually be able to kill you, but for some reason it just doesn't. In Project Zomboid, you can sit butt naked in the snow for weeks in the middle of December and your character will be perfectly fine. Sure, they may catch a nasty cold and their health might drop some, but it will never actually kill them. In fact, in my testing, I found it very hard to even make it drop below 50% because it warms up again during the day, boosting their health almost back up to full. Likewise, heat and exhaustion don't really do much aside from make your character thirsty more quickly and making them move slower. You can very much die of dehydration like we discussed before, but if you have a steady supply of water on hand, there's nothing to worry about. It's actually even more difficult to get them hot enough to even drop health because they get tired and stop moving way before it becomes a problem. Same thing with sleep deprivation. It'll affect your perception, but nothing will happen if you choose to never sleep again. And lastly, carrying heavy objects. Now, most people know this one, but it's still worth mentioning. If you're carrying something like a generator or a fridge, you'll see your health drop from the weight, but it's nothing to worry about. It'll stop at 50% and never actually kill you. Which leads into my PSA for this section. While none of these things will kill your character on their own, the effects do actually stack. So, if you have hypothermia and you're at 1% health, and then you turn on a generator indoors, it will kill your character instantly. Same thing if you fall off the roof while carrying a fridge. If you like this, you'll probably enjoy this video right here. Thanks for watching.